The NHL and the NHLPA have announced that they are going back to the Winter Olympic Games.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Monday, February 5th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez. You can follow me on X at Monoman12, follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. All right, Cats fans, great that the Panthers are back in action as far as being in a practice setting and as they are preparing for the stretch run for the last 33 games of the NHL season right before the Stanley Cup playoffs. And we're going to discuss more about the practice stuff as far as the third and final segment here. But I do want to start off this segment with the All-Star game that happened this weekend in Toronto at Scotiabank Arena, the home of the Maple Leafs, and just really about what Bobrovsky and Reinhart had to say when they had the microphones in their face, and also what happened in the game as well. So as far as the skills competition and the game went, the revamped skills competition was meh, in my opinion. It was cool that Connor McDavid collaborated with the NHL to try to bring a little bit of a different flair to the skills competition. So it's not a coincidence that the guy who designed the competition ended up the guy winning. Obviously, there was still the fastest skater as well as one of those, and like the differences as far as this year, as far as the obstacle course shooting to the three small nets and then that target, and also what when you shot upstairs for one of the competitions, it was 4 points, the sides were 3, and in the middle was 2. I thought that it was a little creative. It was better than most years, but it's still not a perfect product, and I don't think it'll ever be as far as that, especially with the lack of care that happens with this, like especially Nikita Kucherov hearing boos from the crowd in Toronto, and also the fact that Sidney Crosby was in Montana skating and working on his shot, and Frank Saravelli pointed out that if it was any other player doing this, they'd get a lot of flack for it. And that Sid is I guess he's the exception, not the rule when it comes to this. So that's basically what the NHL is basically saying with that. Even sometimes silence is what really speaks when you don't say something about something. And yeah, that Frank Saravelli made a really great point of that. And again, I think that bringing personalities when it comes to this, I thought they did such a great job with 2015 with the player draft that you got to see more of who these players are. And it's I don't know. I just think that with that, they missed an opportunity on doing so. Again, Bobrovsky also spoke about how he spoke with Justin Bieber for the first time when Bieber warmed up with Team Matthews. And by the way, as far as the game went, the Sergei Bobrovsky played in the second half of the first game, tied after the first 10 minutes. Good amount of odd man rushes that Sergei Bobrovsky had to face on the afternoon. Down 3-1, Team McDavid scores 2 with the extra attacker, one of them being David Pastrnak, and the other one being Connor McDavid. And then they went to a shootout, and Bobrovsky stopped both Sidney Crosby and Nathan MacKinnon. And then David Pastrnak scores on his teammate in Jeremy Swayman on the other end. And then Bobrovsky started the All-Star game final, got a save on Mitch Marner, and Mitch Marner threw the glove at him playfully, which is the great thing about that. Even though the Panthers did go into Toronto and win in 5, that they're still joking around, and that, you know, it's not a serious setting as far as that. He did finish 18 of 23 on the day and left the game tied at 3 after the first half of the last game, which Team Matthews ultimately ended up winning. Austin Matthews gets the MVP for the All-Star game, and David Pastrnak had some funny comments on them winning. It's like they needed some type of wins because they haven't been getting any. So that was a little bit of a funny comment from David Pastrnak. Sam Reinhart finished with no points, 3 shots on goal, and a +1 rating on the afternoon for the All-Star game. As far as what was said, also a few things that were said from Reinhart was about his contract situation, and that the focus is still to win the Stanley Cup, and that they are both in good standing. There's no animosity. There's none of that is between them. And let's also not forget that when the Panthers traded for Sam Reinhart on the night of the draft in 2021, that it took a while for them to get to terms on a contract and the number as well. It was, I believe, well into September when the contract was officially announced for Reinhart. He was the last RFA to get his extension there for the Panthers, and everyone else was relatively quick. But also, which you feel get a good feeling the more and more you hear them talk, is that there's a possibility that Bill Zito could get it done before July 1. It'll be a little bit of a scary situation if you let him test out the market. Is that what ultimately gets done? Is that what ultimately happens? Still hard to say, but you're more confident more and more based on the fact that he hasn't won. And that's the ultimate goal of what they want to do, is win a cup. And will another team pay him a whole bunch of money, but he's in a similar situation like he was in Buffalo? And the chemistry here with Barkov, that's another thing. So it tells me that they are in fact in good standing as well when it comes to the contract, and that's a big one as well. And also Bobrovsky also spoke about, even though this was not his first, that he just wants to live in the moment and be there with the guys. Some people who he doesn't get to share a locker room with on the daily. And even though Bobrovsky is pretty reserved, I mean, even if you saw the quest to the cup on ESPN Plus, he is very reserved and also is just so laser focused on the goal at hand when it comes to winning, losing, and all. His mindset doesn't change as far as, and I think that's really, and also let's not forget that when Bobrovsky first signed the contract, he was on social media a lot, and he flipped that. You don't see him online at all. And that, I feel like that was a big change in his focus level, and it's led to such a positive performance on the ice as well. So that's another thing, as far as there's a lot of maturity that happened in him throughout his from year 1 to now as well. And also, he's a new dad. He's not a new dad, but he recently became a dad like a year ago too. So also that focus has changed for him as well. And it's all been for the better. And it's maybe he sees the All-Star game a little differently this time around and doesn't take it for granted. He wasn't asked specifically that question as far as what I watched on the media page as well. So as far as All-Star games in Toronto, I know the players won't want to go there every year because of the weather. But when it talks about the Mecca of hockey and what it brought, it was as far as that. And if you're the NHL, you're seeing that as a success for sure. In segment number 2, we are going to discuss an announcement from the NHL in how they are going back to the Winter Games. We are going to discuss that and more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. And we are past the halfway point of the season. Game 50 is just one day away. And regardless of where the Panthers are at in the current standings, I want to remind you that you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your daily fantasy hockey contest. All you have to do is pick studs like Connor McDavid, Nathan McKinnon, Sidney Crosby, and Sam Reinhart. If they will record more or less the Sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minus in a given game. So you to win a 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Cats fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Back on this Monday, February 5th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Monday. And Cats fans, this is so great, this announcement from the NHL. And listen, this is part of the calendar as well, where the commissioner and the deputy commissioner addresses as far as the state of the league. They were asked about the Hockey Canada investigation as well and expansion, which London police will be holding a press conference today at 2 p.m. about the investigation, by the way. It'll be streamed live on their Facebook page if you guys are interested in watching that. But the commissioner and deputy commissioner also discussed about what's going to be going on as far as best on best hockey, where next year in 2025, there will be no All-Star game. And they will have the Four Nations tournament, something that was reported for now a few weeks, maybe months now. And now, as well, added on to that is the 2026 and 2030 Olympic Games. 2026 being in Italy, 2030 being in Nice, France, which 2026 is going to be a fun year because the World Cup is also in the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, which they announced already where the USA is going to play as far as their group stage games. But as far as USA hockey and international play, best on best is back. Super exciting. Barkov, during practice yesterday, was asked about the Olympic Games and also talking about his experience from back in 2014 playing with guys like Teemu Selanne, Olli Jokinen, and now Barkov is one of those veterans. He's not a spring chicken anymore. And there is a chance that he could be wearing the C for Finland as well. That's the most exciting thing about that. You think of guys like that he could be with, like Sebastian Aho and Mikko Rantanen as well. Those are guys that you could see Barkov possibly playing with as well on Team Finland. And he spoke about his excitement for a guy like Matthew Tkachuk and other people who Matthew Tkachuk wasn't even in the league yet when the last time they went to the Olympic Games in 2014. And also, don't rule out someone like Gus Forsling as well to make it for Team Sweden, whether it's in the Four Nations Cup or the Olympic Games, based on his play as well. Aaron Ekblad's a tough one because we thought he was a lock for 2022, but Omicron variant spread. They were trying to do the All-Star game and possibly go to the Olympics after that, but due to a lot of games being rescheduled, the NHL said no to going to Beijing, and the quarantine that happened that was going to happen had you tested positive. That was just not something that the NHL wanted to risk. And going back to the Olympics, Matthew Tkachuk spoke about how All-Star game compares to competitiveness when you're representing your country and all. It's a different level. And also, Paul Maurice also spoke about how he watches certain sports every 4 years that he doesn't watch throughout the 365-day calendar. And he has gotten some interest and has been intrigued by those events. So, but now with the NHL going back, you're going to see that effect from not only casual hockey fans, but people who just want to see it for the first time, and then they get emotionally roped in, which is, in all this, the only negative, quote unquote, that you could see that in this is loss of revenue for the league, in the short term, which the NHL, maybe, I don't know what necessarily their thinking is, but I hope that they think long term with this and the marketing that comes with the league, and the fact that it's in Europe too, where most games start past midnight there, and they're watching them at their closer to their time, that brings more of those fans to the NHL as well. Even though there's plenty of hockey fans and NHL fans over there too, but even more that they get to watch the product that is here in North America. So I see nothing but positives when it comes to the NHL going back to the Olympics. But for the World Cup of Hockey, though, I did not say this part. It'll be in venues in the cities of Boston and Montreal, as far as the Four Nations tournament as well. So that's another thing as far as that. So as far as the games, it's gonna be, and they're gonna have a rink ready as well for it. So it's gonna be an exciting time once that time does come, for sure. And I hope you guys are just as excited too that your favorite players are going to be part of this. And hey, thankfully, the final, I think Italy's like 6 hours ahead. I could be off by one time zone. A 2 p.m., 3 p.m. final, I'm more than okay with that as far as timing, personally for me. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3, where the Panthers will return to practice on Sunday, and also the mindset of them coming back from break. We are going to discuss that and more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. FanDuel has so many different ways for you to end the season with a dub, or 2, or 3. Not only can you bet on who will win the Super Bowl, but FanDuel has bets for which player will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. New customers, join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Third and final segment here on this Monday, February 5th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Monday. And Panthers returned to practice yesterday at War Memorial, and there are some updates on War Memorial. Actually, before we get to that, congratulations to Zach Daly for now being the all-time leader in goals scored in Charlotte Checkers history. So big congratulations to the captain over there, and has really, I'm sure so many people have so many great things to say about Daly, especially helping the newer guys like a Mackie Semiskevich right now, Justin sort of, as far as being the ultimate professionals as far as that. And another thing, the Panthers announced a new Panthers sub from Publix, which is only at select Publixes in the South Florida area. It includes hot honey chicken tenders, bacon, crispy fried pickles, and the customer's choice of cheese. And we will be we're going to attempt to go to Thursday's game against the Washington Capitals and Saturday's game against the Colorado Avalanche. So you will likely see a taste test sometime on the podcast later this week or early next week, something like that. So that's one thing that the Panthers announced during the weekend. Also, going back to practice, Panthers return. Nick Cousins is in a full contact jersey. William Lockwood is in a gold non-contact jersey, and the Panthers opened the second rink of ice for the players to practice on. It's still not open to the public, unfortunately. And it's called it's sponsored by SeatGeek. So the Baptist Health one, and then the SeatGeek one, which is going to be it's going to be the sheet of ice that the majority of visitors will be skating on. So if you're entering the building, you're going to see the pro shop on your right. Immediately, you're going to see the practice rink where the Panthers practice. And then as you go through the doors to your left, that's the new sheet that the Panthers practice on. So Paul Maurice spoke about how they want to get used to the two sheets, which Maurice said that it's still very fresh ice. So great for the players that they get to be comfortable, especially with when it comes to injuries and all of that, when the sheet is taken care of like it is. So with the practice lines, Cousins was on the line with Eetu Luostarinen and Anton Lundell, which means that Mackie is not going to be called back up, and thought that this was only something for the short term when he was with Barkov on his wing. So, and Maurice, knowing that with a break coming up, that was a little bit of time for him to just get a little bit of playing experience too, as well. So also the players got to speak to the media after. Barkov spoke about how it's all about trying to play the right way, and says everyone still knows how to play hockey, even though there was an extended time off. Nick Cousins, because when you're when you're on IR, you're not obligated to talk to the media. So this was his first session in a while, and even claps from the teammates as they were walking by him uh, of him speaking to the media. Is like, I saw that as a welcome back to Nick Cousins. So he was not asked, though, however, about the anonymous player survey from The Athletic. So he was not asked that question as far as that. But Nick Cousins was asked about wanting to play about being in a different position this year and saying you want to play your best hockey going into playoffs, and does it feel more like a sprint, excuse me, and talks about how it's the best time of the year, that teams are trying to find their game and others are fighting and scratching and clawing like the team was last year. So they know that they're getting other teams is best when it comes to these next 33. Paul Maurice, though, and there's a lot of great forward thinking that Maurice has. And one of them is just the schedule breakdown on what's coming up. And the blocks of 4 games during a week, and a lot of them having sets of back-to-backs in them as well. So not gonna be an easy stretch, but it's still great that the Panthers still have that advantage as far as time zone, where they only have to leave once on March 12th against the Dallas Stars. That's a huge advantage. And all that travel early on, and they still lead the East in road wins and regulation wins. Can't ask for anything better. And also, the team's mindset when a break comes during a 4-game winning streak, because most teams would think, oh, you don't want this to come during a winning streak. It could ruin the momentum. The Panthers don't see it that way. They want to get the rest. And that this part of the season isn't the be-all, end-all of what the goal is ultimately for this group of guys. So the way I see it is that their heads are in the right place. You don't need Paul Maurice to walk into the locker room to motivate these guys, and they know how to motivate themselves. But also, yeah, a coach is there to make you better and all, but motivation in actuality should not have to come externally. It has to come from everyone. And and that's why it goes back to the whole Maurice talking about the players running the bench, how he allows that. And I think speaks volumes to knowing when to have hands off and when to say what he needs to say. Picking and choosing when you need to. Gus Forsling also spoke to the media about him coming back and how the team was it's time to dial in, and how everyone's a pro for not, and talking about pros as mindsets going into the stretch. Matthew Tkachuk spoke about fresh and rejuvenated. We all need, and he added on. Well, we spoke to the media, excuse me. I was not there on Sunday, but the people there spoke to Matthew Tkachuk before Maurice. But Matthew Tkachuk was the first one to say that we'll take the little break when going into the All-Star break. So teams in good spirits. They know that these next 33 games are all about just trying to find what works and what doesn't. And so far, the first 49, things are working really well, especially with their defensive structure, which you see a lot of them top 5 in the league. So it's just about continuing to try to build and see more of what their needs could be. Well, that's more of a Bill Zito conversation as far as that, what their needs could be. Because just looking down at my calendar on my computer, we are a month and 3 days from the trade deadline. And if you followed the news this week, there's already 2 trades that really kicked off the deadline, with Elias Lindholm being traded to the Vancouver Canucks and Sean Monahan being traded from Montreal to Winnipeg. But I think that's a good place to leave today's show, because we still have one more day until the Panthers take the ice again in a game setting. But we will discuss on tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast what those trades of Elias Lindholm and Sean Monahan mean for the rest of the market in the NHL, and even for the Florida Panthers, as they are trying to just build for the ultimate goal, and that's to get another extended playoff run and hoisting the Stanley Cup. That's going to do it for today's show. Thank you all for listening. Make sure you subscribe anywhere you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. Make sure you also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez, signing off. And you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.